Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Dreadgod, the 11th book in the Cradle series. In this chapter, this one single solitary chapter that I got to read, chapter 2, I am so freaked out by anybody who can come into dreams. Anytime that's a trope, count me out. No thank you. I am not interested. Pass. Hard pass. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. Andy is here in the chat. Hi, Andy. So, you guys, this was anytime, full disclosure, in the Cradle books, anytime that we suddenly have a chapter that starts with so-and-so, and it's a name that we have never heard, there is an instant for me of going, oh God, who's this now? Like just a fraction of a second of just, no, I don't know them. No, where's Yaren? Where's Lyndon? What's happening? Who is this? And I don't know why I do that, because every time that section and POV, it's a fucking banger. It slaps. And I don't know when I'm going to learn that I don't need to get all agitated about it. I have like Bran syndrome. Those of you who read Song of Ice and Fire probably know what I'm talking about. And I just kind of feel like I'm going to be getting a Bran chapter. And that has literally never happened. So I don't know why I still have it, but it's very deeply ingrained. So we start off here with a character named Karani. And we get a whole like story on her hopes and dreams. She wants to take this amazing vacation. She is working in this foundry isn't the word. Is she like a soulsmith exactly? Because she also works in some real solid like plumbing stuff. We find out later that she was checking the rivets in their sewer system. And I'm not sure if that comes under soulsmithing or not, but she is a hard worker with a boss who is a little bit, her boss reminds me of me, except more energetic. And she is thinking about the script that she's using right now. Her personal bound spirit was contained in a tank on her back. Burning Swan was a natural fire spirit she'd raised for years, and she could channel his energies for welding or theoretically for combat. So I am loving this, that she has a spirit in a tank that she uses to weld, but also as a guide that she can kind of talk to. I absolutely cannot with the idea of, and I know it's not a comparable situation, but can you imagine Lyndon being like, hey, Dross, get in this tank. I'm just going to carry you around. Like, I know it's not the same thing. They're totally different, like, beings. But just the idea. And her boss has 2 spirits in tanks that she wears. And I don't know if this is the first time that we're seeing this really, or if it's only the first time that I've taken notice of it. But I found this so fascinating. This is the kind of shit that I'm like, but more now, more about this. I want to understand how that works. And this is when her boss, Turkle, comes dancing in. Oh, my darling, my favorite, how are you doing this fine evening? She did a pirouette and finished her spin with a flourish as she reached Karani. And I like this moment where Karani has been thinking that she was going to duck out and try and avoid this woman. But she's a little bit too, won over to be irritated by it. And this lady invites her to stay for dinner. And for the first time, she's kind of going, maybe I will. And I can't tell if this is because this woman just is being so charismatic in the moment that Karani's won over, or if this is some of the Silent King influence working on her very subtly to be like, no, you don't want to leave. You want to stay. You would like to go to dinner with her. You would like to spend some extra time with her. She's not annoying you today. I don't know if that's even it, but it kind of had me wondering a little bit once we find out what happens. So I love this moment here. When Karani had finished her 100th job with the company, Turkle had commissioned a light sculpture of the, quote, triumphant moment. The job had been the inspection of rivets in a sewer runoff pipe, and it had taken 15 minutes. I wish we had more employers like that. I do love that so much, y'all. The idea of somebody over-celebrating every little achievement, I know, especially as a child, that's going to do, like, some damage later. I know it did for me, because my parents praised me too much. I'll be honest. They did. Like, I love them. My dad, it wasn't as much of a problem, but my mom, like, really did. And then you grow up and people don't praise you the same way, and you're kind of like, what the fuck? But if you're older, and a lot of your developing is done, and you come across an employer who does this, I am just all for it. I just can't find it. She's so sincere, you know? And she, like, look, I know she's not really sincere, but we're not going to talk about that yet. Okay, so at this point, she's about to accept the offer when all of a sudden, Burning Swan whispers in her mind, enemy. And for a second, I love this so much. Thank you again, Will White, for writing a character with a brain in their head. She has a moment where she's like, do I have to, like, get you taken in for recalibration? What is going on? And then she goes, just to be safe, I'm going to do a little scan. And thank you, because so much of the time you read things like this and the person is just like, oh, something's wrong with my thing that tells me information that's crucial. Obviously, it can't be that the crucial information is coming in a form I didn't expect. It's that this is broken and it's the worst. So instead, she is very reasonably going, what does it hurt for me to just do a little bit of a scan here and check? It doesn't hurt anything. Let me just go ahead. And then she sees this crown hovering around this woman's head, this white crown. And I feel like it's been mentioned that the white crown is a symptom of being under his control. I like, it rang a vague bell, and I assumed within the scene when she sees it, I was like, okay, that means that, but I didn't actually fully remember, just saying. And I really, like, the whole bit is preceded by her thinking about Turkle not being much of a fighter, and she's not really a threat. And this is always the thing that I find the scariest, is when somebody is behaving in a way that is so open-hearted, seemingly, and they genuinely appear to have your best interests in mind, and don't seem to be aware of what's got a hold of them. Anytime the possessed party in media is, like, sweet and kind, it is so much more unnerving, man. It is just so much creepier. All I can think about with this are the neighbors in Rosemary's Baby, who seem like really sweet, good people who just, like, are trying to befriend their neighbors. And then it turns out that's not it at all, actually. There is, I think gets under my skin because some of the most dangerous people in life are very charismatic and seem really nice and sweet on the surface. And that is how they fool people. And it sucks because here, this isn't this woman trying to fool her. I mean, she is trying, but like she isn't really aware that's what she's trying to do. So her not being in control of it is so much worse. I just hate this for both of them. So before she does the scan, she just asks Turkle, have you had any weird dreams? And Turkle says, oh, I almost forgot to tell you, I have had the best sleep of my life lately. I have this tea that you drink before bed, and emeras take my lips now if I know what they put into it, but the second I close my eyes, I drift right off. And I'm like, you didn't answer the question. Like, she doesn't answer the question. So it follows with Karani going, she kept chattering, but she didn't say anything about meeting a stranger in her sleep. Karani didn't hear anything wrong. And I'm like, you didn't hear anything about her meeting a stranger because she didn't answer your fucking question, which is highly suspect. If she was given the same alert that you were given and she is not taken by this thing, this would be a yes or no answer question. She would know that. So that's the answer. Something is wrong. But this is when Burning Swan tells her to look, and she does. And she sees the crown and doesn't even try to like cover or come up with a story. She just fucking runs. And she triggers an emergency alarm and slams this door behind her. And this moment, I hate this so much. So Turkle is just kind of like, what are you doing? This isn't funny. And then these security guys show up. And she's like, my supervisor, she has a crown. I saw it. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I don't know. And then Burning Swan says enemies. And I was like, oh, no. And I thought we were going to see this girl get got. I really did. And she backs against the wall and is like, what is happening? And Karani doesn't seem to understand anything. Later on, Turkle. Turkle takes her by the hand and is like, come into my office. I don't know what's going on, but let's talk. Shoo out of here, you security guys. Let's go to my office. And they turn the corner and there is a body on the floor. A security guy soaking his blood into the carpet. And Turkle doesn't see him. She's standing with a foot braced against the side of this man's head, like on his ear, about to step on him as she walks this girl to her office and genuinely doesn't see him. And it takes a minute for Karani to be like, oh my God, she can't see his body. And finally, they go into the office, and this bitch accepts the cup of tea. Karani, I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. And you took the cup of tea from the possessed woman. And look, I understand it's part of a routine. This is the way things go. But really though, what are you doing? Oh my God. What? So she takes a sip and I'm like, she just talked about the fucking tea that sends her to sleep. Why are you doing this? Sure enough, she takes a sip and all of a sudden there's a knock on the door. Could you get that for me, dear? And she starts to go to the door, and Burning Swan begins vibrating and saying danger. And she backs up and says, why don't you get it? It has to be you. Go on, girl. And then we hear this voice say, let me in, Karani, and I will explain everything. And she knows, finally. You brought me into a dream. The steel container strapped to Turkle's left wrist was open, and there was no shimmering purple light coming from inside. Her dream remnant was missing. She'd used a technique or an elixir in the tea, or both. I hate this so much, you guys. This was so creepy. It really was. So she looks at this, like, window that is way too thick for her to break through. And she's thinking, I can melt it, though. And she starts to use the spirit tank to melt the glass. I love Turkle saying, you're going to dry out my skin. I don't know why, but that really got to me. And the voice behind the door says, there's no risk to you. Life is far safer for my friends than my enemies. And she's looking at this like red hot edge to this window and wondering if jumping out this way is even going to help, because she can't tell how much of this is real and what isn't. So like, if she's fully in a real dream, maybe it won't matter. Maybe it does matter that she doesn't like allow him in, and that's the part that counts. Like, she doesn't know, because why would you know? And then she's about to go out that opening she made, and she turns and there is a face in the window and she screams. And I can't blame her, because this is the real creepy version of Dross. This is emo Dross. I'm going to call him that, because like, he's not evil, you know, he's not malicious. He's just kind of a drama queen. Like, he feels like he should be reading something written by Byron with a pair of like red tinted spectacles sitting off under a tree somewhere with a glass of absinthe. That's the vibe I get off of this Dross, you know? So, and I almost want to say goth, but like, it's too heartfelt. Goth is so aesthetic. And the emo thing feels like that's where the drama really comes in. And you just sort of, it becomes a bit of a performance. As we see later, he's saying things that he doesn't even really believe. And Linden has to stop him and be like, that's not true, you know? And Dross is like, I know it's not, but it would be really dope if it were, though. And I'm like, yeah, okay. See, what's going on? You like want shit to be more drama than it even is. And it's already plenty. So why are you doing this? So he comes in, and I love the way Travis delivers this line. I have come to pull you from the abyss of silence, to free you from the chains that bind your mind and restore you to the waking world. And don't be afraid. You're not helping, Dross. Okay, like, you are you're literally helping. But come on, man. You've got to tone it down a little bit. I can't. This is too funny. So then she's like, okay, Burning Swan, kill this thing, because yikes, clearly this is bad. And Burning Swan has to be like, actually, no, it's strong and it's not an enemy. And Turkle starts yelling at it, get out, I'll claw out your soul. To which Dross is like, ooh, kind of interested actually, now that you say it like that. And we get the Silent King being like, wow, you're intruding into this, like, that's pretty boss, actually. Like, there's a feeling of impressed coming from him. And I really love the fact that Linden has this mind spirit to work for him in a dream scenario. I have to assume that there are other monarchs who could also approach people within dreams and stuff, that this is like an ability that they could have. But the fact that Dross is so separated from Linden, that he can function without Linden being directly engaged with him, and Linden's out there fighting a whole separate battle and basically sends Dross on his behalf, that feels like a pretty distinct advantage. And I am not sure how many other, you know, people out there have this, anything like this ability that will help with this particular Dreadgod, but it makes a lot of sense that Linden is the one that headed in this direction, and that Yeren is the one that's going to deal with the Bleeding Phoenix. The fucking Bleeding Phoenix, which is fucking back. This thing, I am sick of it. I'll just say that. The Bleeding Phoenix, I'm over it. It's over. It's canceled. Stop it. You've had your time. You're just a has-been. Knock it off. Nobody cares. Anyway, we'll get to that later. So, he pulls her through the glass, and she isn't outside. She winds up in the engine room. And she's like, wait, what's happening? And I really liked that moment, because it's underlining how she's still in a dream. Like, there's moments in this where I'm like, oh, that feels real, and then not. So it's just as confusing for her. And she says, when she sees the guy's body again, I thought that was a dream. That dream was a mirror of reality and a subtle trap, an elaborate boundary field. I almost want to stay trapped myself, to wander its dark halls and admire its intricate folds, but I suppose there's a battle going on. So they go outside, and she sees her fellow employees. They hadn't gone home as they had been supposed to. In fact, it looked like they'd been trapped as soon as they left the building. Some had dropped their belongings to the grass to stare up at the sky. Now they all stared upward and contributed to the battle. And they're all synchronized because there's one mind controlling all of them. They all have their crown behind their head. And she is noticing how enraged they all look, firing on this target. And it's a ball of dark fire that blazed like a black sun. And they are hitting it with thousands of techniques. And it's doing nothing. Now, I would like to mention, as you all know, I mentioned this last week, I am in the midst of my reread. Currently on Black Flame. He has not yet taken Black Flame yet. They haven't even gotten to the Black Flame Empire yet, but they are on their way. And Lyndon is having trouble carrying water because it's heavy. And now he's flying. He's flying and surrounded by a ball of fire, and there are thousands of like gold level warriors firing on him, accomplishing nothing. It is really wild just to go from that to this. I'm just saying. So, let's see. The three chief guardians of the Dreadnought City, archlords with such advanced remnants that they looked fully physical. Each of them had a white ring behind their head. What is this? I suspect you know, but the reality is too grim to fully accept. With one arm, Dross pointed to the dark star. I'm with him. The angular crystal warrior conjured a storm of blades that shredded the tops of nearby buildings. Glass and steel plummeted to the streets below. Aura of fire and destruction appeared in a swirl of black and red, and the debris was erased. Whoever this dark fire artist was, they were trying to restrict damage to the city. The blue blades crashed into the ball of fire and vanished, but lightning fell and a spear of silver light struck at the same time. The fire transformed instantly. It flashed to blue-white light, and all the hostile techniques vanished. Karani could just barely make out a dot at the center of the light. A person. Is that a monarch? That's the Sage of Twin Stars, Dross said, and here's your ride. And when she asks how many are left, he says many more. And I was like, thank God for that. Because Dross, Lord knows the kinds of responses he could give her right now. He has got a weird frame of mind at the moment. And he did something, used some kind of technique, though Karani could barely understand the intricacies of his Madra. All over the city, she saw dark orbs outlined by purple light, more spirits like Dross. Then again, they didn't feel like copies. They felt like exactly the same spirit. Word? It's like that now? Dross can just copy himself and just be out here like dozens all over the place. That is wild. I don't know. I have to assume that's like an effect of his upgrade. And I miss old Dross, don't get me wrong, but that is handy. Like, I can't be mad at that. So then we go to Yaren. And so she appears on half a ship. It says after she'd arrived in the labyrinth at the bottom of the trackless sea, she'd felt a beacon calling for help and moved for it. She guessed at some point that beacon had been sailing across the ocean, but now the ship had been torn to pieces. Yaren stood on a floating chunk of wood, which was probably the safest place to be at the moment. And I just felt so much for them. Like, a beacon goes off, you're wanting help, your whole place gets destroyed, and then somebody appears on the wreckage, literally standing on the wreck. That would just be very demoralizing. And she can feel the spirit, and she's managing to concentrate to keep its cries from penetrating, but they do get through later, and it's awful. The Dreadgod wasn't close enough to fight, but close enough to be a disaster. There was an island nearby, which held a decent-sized town in the shadow of a mountain. The town blazed with Madra of a dozen different aspects, as sacred artists and constructs strained themselves to the breaking point to resist the army in front of them. Like ants, red spots crawled all over the mountain. And I was like, not these things again. I hate them. And then it says, if that had been the only problem, Emrys Silentborn wouldn't have called her. And I was like, oh no. I already hated this, and now we're just like, oh, then that's not even like the big problem. Because there are two from the 8-Man Empire here. Very strong. A man in gold armor. And what is the name? Oh, that guy is the one that I think is like very loud and laughy a little bit later. And his partner, another man in gold armor, faced a monster of blood that plunged from above. Monster was the best Yaren could do to describe it. The thing looked like a sack full of giant squids that had all melted together. And the one that the first dude is fighting is a Leviathan, corrupted by a scarlet ooze that covered its skin, a noxious parasite that infused its soul with blood Madra. The Leviathan had been consumed by a blood shadow and was a husk of itself. Yo, these things, I swear to God, they could take over a fucking whale? That's just not really nice, is it? The whale is just minding its own business. Like, look, I get that the sacred artists are too, technically, but they also are consciously, like, engaging in magic. And not to say that they brought it on themselves, but it feels like they are part of a world with the understanding of some of the risks. And I do have to remember sometimes that, like, sacred beasts can advance, so they're not totally unconscious in this world either, but it just felt like you're picking on a fucking poor animal. It's just really mean-spirited. So, Yaren would bet this blood shadow would fall apart on its own before the end of the day, but at the moment, it blazed with power that dwarfed even the men in gold. It felt like a true fragment of the Bleeding Phoenix, and a casual blow from it could level the town and the entire island beneath it. And she's watching them and she's like, I think that they can win, actually, but I don't know that they can win and everybody on the island below them won't die. So the black blade of her sword, Netherclaw, rang like a bell. The island was probably a mile away, but that was easy for her to reach now. Plenty of bloodspawn carried weapons or shaped themselves into sharp edges, and some of them had sword Madra of their own. Her endless sword technique also carried a touch of blood aura since her merge with Ruby, so it affected the Phoenix's spawn better than it would have before. Crimson Madra and essence sprayed up from all over the mountain. That would do for many of the blood spawn and would lessen the pressure on the town's defenders, but it wouldn't be enough to wipe the army out. Before the echo of the endless sword had faded, Yaren whipped her blade horizontally and sent out a striker technique. The rippling sword was a silver and red wave of Madra that expanded as it flew, scraping the entire island clean between the mountain and the town. In fact, it sliced a few hills and carved a gash into the base of the mountain. A small one. Yaren doubted the townsfolk would mind. That swept the blood spawn away from the island like a broom catching dust. Okay, that's rad. Like, all I can think about is when you're baking and you just use a bench scraper to, like, slice a piece of dough in half and pull it away and scrape all the flour and everything. It's so satisfying. It really is. And that is what this reminded me of. And yet, this draws attention because obviously she's working with quite a bit here. And this light grows beneath her, and this thing comes up out of the water. And she is like, okay, this isn't a Leviathan that's been taken over. It's a blood shadow that's taken the form of a Leviathan. But it doesn't seem to really matter. The force of her jump shoved the wreckage of the boat down the monster's throat. She activated the binding in Netherclaw, and a huge clawed hand forged itself in midair. The hand struck the inside of the Leviathan's jaws, and her technique wrestled with the monster among the sloshing waves as she called a 1,000-mile cloud from her void key. I want to see all of this so bad. And I really do. I get why everybody wants this to be animated, and I'm sure that would be dope. But I really want, like, I imagine everything in live action. And I don't think that we are at the place where we could afford to do what all of this series does justice without an insane budget. So I don't think we should ever have a live action, not for like quite a while, not until we have made some pretty big leaps and bounds in the effects we can do. But I hold out hope that someday we're going to get like a full live action show. I just really would like that. I understand the desire for the animated, and I wouldn't be mad at that, of course. But there's a part of me that's like, really, you know? So all of this to say, fighty. And they managed to like get to a point where they have a bit of breathing space. There are a lot of monsters going on here, and there's a lot of like tentacles and tendrils and shit. And then all of a sudden the one of them like pierces her shoulder, and she gets the sound of the phoenix in her head, and it is just like, the way he describes it is grating on her soul, which that really got to me for some reason. She plunged her sword into the side of the shadow's mouth. The entire Leviathan shape deformed as it started to collapse, ready to crush her. It didn't react to the pain. In fact, she thought it might not feel anything. See if it feels this, Yaren thought. She'd absorbed the diamond veins she'd won in the Uncrowned King tournament, and after that, her merge with Ruby had improved her Madra channels even further. In other words, she could use a lot of techniques at once without her spirit exploding. So, she does a bunch of stuff, and it explodes, and she just, like, emerges from it covered in blood. Wait, no, she's not. She found herself glad this wasn't the physical Leviathan, or she would have been soaked in gore. Honestly, I'm still imagining her soaked in gore, I'm going to be honest, because there's just something incredibly badass about it. And this is when she has the little conversation with these two guys, the two members of the 8-man empire. And the first one, like, is the dude who laughs loudly and is like, oh, young Harold, you've really fucking powered up. I'm seeing a lot of progress here. And she says something about how, like, you guys were handling it pretty well without me. And then the second guy, who is a lot more low-key, is saying, I'm sure that the people will be really grateful to you. We have long sought an opportunity to fight at your side, young Harold, the first pronounced. And I was like, ooh, I love this. They are all together a monarch. So they're each a herald. So they're on the same par of power as she is. And are extremely interested. And there's something very flattering about knowing how powerful these people are. And that she has gotten their attention at this point. Like, I'm just proud of her. You know, I am. And he says, we saw your master reveal himself and ascend to the heavens. You do not have to share his wisdom with us, but as his disciples, I'm sure you understand how the world works. If you wish to ascend, we would understand. But if not, the two of you would fit our armor well. A sage, a herald, a perfect match. I don't think our squires would object. And all throughout all of this, true to form, Yaren is just like, look, guys, thanks and everything, but we're like working. We're in the middle of it. We have shit to do. And they say, well, we do know that you have the Moonlight Bridge that you used to get here. And it takes some time to recharge, so you'll be here for a few days. But she hadn't actually used it. She went through the labyrinth, and she just keeps that shit to herself, which I think is the right thing to do. Let them not know. Because, like, the less anybody knows, the better. And she's perfectly aware of that. So it says she was looking forward to fighting at the side of the 8-man empire. She could learn a lot from their sacred arts, even if she wasn't much interested in their armor. But she'd feel better when she could return at a moment's notice. Lyndon would be in Everwood by now with his own battle to fight. He wasn't supposed to come anywhere near the Dreadgod itself, but she had heard horror stories about the Silent King. Then again, she'd heard horror stories about the Bleeding Phoenix too. She'd lived some of them. So this is... I just don't want the Bleeding Phoenix anymore, guys. Just... I don't want to deal with it. I really don't. The Silent King is so intriguing. And the Bleeding Phoenix we've dealt with. I would like to be able to move away from it and just focus on the Silent King mostly. The only thing that keeps the Bleeding Phoenix from being straight up boring to me is the fact that Yaren is just so capable at the moment, and her connection with Blood Madra is like... It is of a level now that she has the effect that she does. But low-key, I'm not interested, Phoenix. So, then we go to a, let's see, this moment with the earth artist covered in blue crystal used a forger technique, and thousands of razor-edged sapphires appeared in the sky behind Lyndon. Each gemstone carried an Archlord's focused will and practiced Madra control. The crystals were an armory that stretched behind him in an endless flock, a barrage that could wipe out cities. Worse, he wasn't alone. His partner, a woman sheathed in a clawed remnant of mirror-bright sword Madra, filled herself with an enforcer technique. She blazed with light and power, coiling against an invisible platform she made with her aura control, and prepared to leap forward. And he is up here looking down on them like, all right, Dross, how's the evacuation going? How much more of this do I have to do? And Dross says, the king himself is our aide. He has removed his drones from the city to bombard you from the outskirts. And there are a couple things here. The fact that he is doing this, and the fact that he isn't just sacrificing all of the pawns that he has. Lyndon, because Dross rightfully is like, why isn't he though? And Lyndon is assuming that he wants slaves, so he's like preserving his property, basically. I am not so certain that's the case, but I can't think of another reason. So I'm just going to go with that as the explanation for right now, and then feel like an idiot later, probably, when that's not what it is. So they release their attacks on him, and he dodges and blasts and slaps some away. And he calls the burning cloak. And there is this moment that I really enjoy where it says, Dross had given Lyndon a deeper understanding of these three. The chief guardian of the Dreadnought City were ancient archlords, each with a rich history of battles won and lost. In experience, he couldn't compare. They would be far more skilled than he was. Even if he could outmatch them in raw power, he would be hard-pressed to defeat any of them in a fair fight. But he had unfair advantages. She will have forged spirits to defend her while she is vulnerable. They are only a distraction. The remnant covering her conceals armor that makes her as tough as a herald, but it has a flaw. Dross knew very little about these chief guardians from his own experience, but Emrys knew everything about them, and she shared. What a fucking concept, huh? She shared. She shared. Monarchs? You dicks? Just literally, all I ask most of the time is like, just fucking communicate ever at all. Stop playing like a game and just actually share information. And they just don't, because they're douchebags. And Emrys is like the only one. I'm basically like AMAB at this point, but except for Emrys. So I guess it's not really AMAB. It's AMAB asterisk. And Emrys, I don't even know, like, I don't know. I don't know if she even like quite counts because she's so outside of their little fucking bullshit that they're doing that I can't even imagine her in the same category. She's like beyond, you know? And I don't know that she actually is power wise, but I just think of her as outside of all of that, ascended, but not in the way that is literal in this world. So anyway, he hits her in this exact weak point of her armor and it just falls apart and he sees this woman underneath. She restored her remnant a moment later and flew away on lightning wings, greatly weakened. And I was like, wow. So just hitting her that way, it doesn't kill her, but it takes her out of the fight for the foreseeable future, which is pretty amazing. I mean, I almost feel bad for her, you know, like, but I don't. I mean, I do feel bad for her, actually. I take it back. I was going to say I don't. But she's being fucking controlled. So, yeah, I definitely feel bad for her. And let's see. He moves so the forged sapphire crystals were blasting towards the silver archlady instead of him. The blue crystal archlord unraveled the technique before his ally was harmed, which lessened the pressure on Lyndon, allowing him to send Wave Dancer against the sword artist. The sword clashed against one claw, then the other claw tore apart his dragon's breath, and the archlady leaped at him. He dashed backward. And it says, Dross couldn't project an illusion into their minds while the Silent King controlled them. The Dreadgod of dreams would squash him like a wagon wheel rolling over a snake, which is so vivid. Truly. Visceral. Without that distraction, any sage working that Lyndon tried would be broken by the force of their combined willpower. And this is when Dross says, the time has come to unleash ourselves. He sent black flame pouring through his palms. The Madra obeyed him with only a thought, erupting into liquid flame that blasted into empty air, but it wasn't empty for long. An instant later, the sword artist appeared in the path of his striker technique just as predicted. Her silver remnant carapace was struck full force, and she shot backward, blasting through another tall building. She flew like a shooting star, trailing black fire propelled by dragon's breath to smash through several walls. Oh, that is embarrassing. When she was out of the city limits, Lyndon could see through a hole in 3 buildings that stared up at the corrupted white sky. Honestly, guys, can you imagine just being chucked through 3 buildings? Oh, the shame of it, truly. So he goes up against this guy. He tries to do his like release and get his armor to let go of him. But this guy also has some pretty good willpower, so it doesn't fully work. And while that guy is distracted with trying to resist Lyndon, he attacks from behind with Wave Dancer and stabs him through the chest. And he will survive this, but it punctures his spirit tank. The remnant of blue crystal peeled away, partially dissolved to essence. It flailed its limbs in high-pitched agony. The Everwood Archlord retreated just as his companion had, leaving Lyndon floating in the air over a ruined city. Only one to go, Dross noted. And then he begins to consume the remnant that is here, which I had sort of forgotten how intense it is whenever he does this, but I have to like also bring up the reread and the Ancestor Spear and Jai Long trying to do this and how it almost kills him one time. I don't know if you guys remember, but he just winds up having to like vent Madra into the air screaming in order to not just basically like pop like a bubble. And it is remarkable to see it being handled well, and the comparison between being completely overwhelmed, not knowing how to do anything with this energy, and then seeing somebody who has the tools available to separate it out and direct the exact things to where they need to go. It's just a very interesting thing to compare. And the dream aura goes to Dross. Ordinarily, he would have vented the remaining sword Madra he couldn't use, or potentially forged it into scales or dead matter, but his new arm of pale flesh was hungry, and it ate anything. The remnant vanished into his arm, leaving a struggling archlady with a white crown behind her head. And Lyndon begins to consume the actual crown, which I did not know was even a thing that could happen. Like, when you stop and think about it, it makes sense. This is a kind of a construct made of Madra, I'm assuming. So he drinks Madra, sure, he can. But I'm not thinking of it like that because of it being projected from somewhere else. And so it just didn't occur to me this could even work. It worked like a parasite. Not only did it keep the host vulnerable to the Silent King's commands, but it siphoned off their excess dream aura and transmitted it directly back to the Dreadgod, a combination of dream and hunger Madra, which, that's pretty wild, actually. It didn't take enough from any one person to leave them mindless or dead, but the Silent King fed on millions at once. The crown resisted at first, but Lyndon crushed it. Its power flowed into him, a feast for both his Dreadgod arm and for Dross. Wow. Convenient. That works out really tidily. And then, all of a sudden, there's the Silent King. And he's not actually here, but he's here enough for it to be fucking terrifying. And this dude is like, wow. So you're stealing this, and you stole a piece of my brother. It's kind of fucked up, bruh. And then does you should work for me. You'll be safe if you work for me. And I love Lyndon. Regretfully, I don't believe our goals are compatible. Oh, man. That is just beautiful. That's like the kind of email you would send to a shitty manager. Like, there's just something so professional office decorum about that. I love it so much. So, this is when the Silent King names a bunch of people. Wei Shi Seisha, your mother, is in Serpent's Grave in the Black Flame Empire in Ashwind. Wei Shi Jiran, Wei Shi Kelsa, I know them. I know you. With my many eyes, I see you, who stole my brother's flesh. Lyndon, you took my birthplace and the power of my kind. In return, I claim your life. Orthos is not safe from me because he is close to you. Akura Mercy is not safe from me because she is the daughter of a monarch. Yeren is not safe from me because she is a defective herald, to which I was like, I thought she had that fixed. I thought the monarchs fixed it. He's calling her defective. I honestly took offense. That was very personal. And Dross is not safe from me because he remains silent. And he forces Dross out of Lyndon. And Dross just says, I wonder if Ethan can speak with the dead. Maybe I'll see him before you will. And I was just like, Dross, stop it. You're killing me. There was something so, like, devastating about that. He's so matter of fact while still being very dreamy. It's creepy. Anyway, Lyndon says, enough. The connection shredded itself, fading to nothing. As the image of the Silent King faded away, the Dreadgod spoke once more. I will not relinquish you, Lyndon. The sooner you dedicate your life to me, the fewer of them will die. Be wary, because I come for you. And honestly, that shit was scary. There is something about the way that Will White writes threats, and he manages to make them just understated enough to be genuinely scary. Whereas a lot of writers, I think, go too hard with like flowery language that kind of undermines it, and you lose the point of what they're saying sometimes. And this is just like, just come over to my side. Fewer of your friends will die. Watch out, bitch. Protect your neck. I don't like it. And I also would like to once again register how I don't care for the fact that this is a Dreadgod that can, like, have a full fucking conversation. Dislike very, very much. I just find it so unnerving. All of this is leveling up in a way that's, like, simultaneously great for Lyndon because of the dream and hunger combo. Fantastic. So I am excited in a way because he could just do a lot with this. But it's also dream and hunger, which feels like it's... there's something about it that feels almost too perfect, like it's a trap. But, you know, I'm paranoid at this point. And he's thinking to himself, like, well, now I have a target on my back, and I knew that that was going to happen eventually. But Lord have mercy, that really is scary. Knowing that it's probably going to happen is very different to getting basically censured by a Dreadgod in front of my face. And Dross has found his lair here. The Silent King's new lair is 300 miles southwest of this location. He sleeps in a dark cave and keeps his voice quiet as befitting of his name. So he tells Lyndon for Dross to give this. Lyndon tells Dross to give this information to Emrys, and then he heads back to the labyrinth and tells it to bring him home. The center of the valley, Sacred Valley, which had been leveled by the rampaging Titan and then damaged again by battle only a few days ago, was in even worse shape than Dreadnought City. Lyndon brought the fleeing civilians in by air so that they wouldn't have to navigate through miles of debris to exit. And this whole situation, it is so easy for me to just like forget what was left behind and how recent it happened. Like, because of the gap between books, I'm feeling like they had all this time, but clearly they have not, and they're still barely getting by and trying to... rebuilding isn't even like on the menu yet. It's just kind of survive this war still, and then we'll try and deal with you once we know that they're all dealt with. I was going to say dead, but they can't really die, so unless they get these fucking monarchs to ascend... So it says transportation through the labyrinth was far cheaper than most spatial transport. There were endless applications for such an ability, and Lyndon dreamed about them in his few spare moments. And yeah, this has been occurring to me as well, that the fact that he has got this labyrinth at his disposal now, when this spatial transfer we know is like, I mean, for example, oh my God, not the Sage of Silverheart. That was the other one. What is Akura Mercy's aunt's name? Is she the Sage of the Silverheart? She's not, right? But Lyndon asked her to like transport him, and she's a sage, and it was like a big deal for him to ask. And the transport took several days. Like, we know how much energy traveling takes up. And the fact that he has this is just such a gigantic advantage that a part of me almost feels like it's a cheat, but I can't be mad at it because it was just set up so completely, you know? People are saying she is the Sage of Silver Heart. Okay, so I was right. Charity, Andy says. Thank you. Charity. So let's see. Oh, right. So this is the part where he thinks about the fact that apparently the heavens, and Suriel is the one he's particularly thinking about, didn't erase the memory of what all happened with Ethan from anyone. And Lyndon had kind of thought maybe they'll leave the, people who are sort of overlord and above their memories and everybody else will forget. Not so. Not a single person had their memory wiped at all. And he's wondering why not. And I was like, well, the thing is, Ethan, I feel like, how do you completely erase his disappearance? Like when Suriel reset what happened in his village in the very first book, she was undoing everything that occurred and making it so that it had never occurred. She can't do that here because Ethan was involved in everything. So I'm assuming doing that would fuck up way too much. Like, he has had a lasting impact for years at this point because of his occupation and influence over all of these people. And she can't just like pull him and he vanishes and a bunch of people just never, like, I feel like he is puzzled by the fact that that she doesn't do the same thing. And I'm like, these are entirely different situations, man. Like, I don't know if he's thinking that not everybody who saw Ethan ascend knew Ethan, so they could have their minds erased. But there comes a point, like, how many people are you going to do this to? And they took Ethan up with them. But like I said, it's not like, I mean, they undid some things. It's just different. I was surprised that he had this question, is basically what I'm saying. Because it is too mixed in. Everything is a jumble. And I just don't see how there could be a way to pull that off and have it work and be like less confusing than the alternative. So he goes home and here is Pride. Pride, honestly, he's such a brat. Like, I do enjoy him in a way, but I also want Lyndon to flex on him more than he does. And I respect that he doesn't, because that's what makes Lyndon Lyndon, is that he doesn't flex unless it's absolutely required for the situation. He is not driven by his ego. He just isn't. And I really respect, that's what I like about him. But then there are times where I really wish he would fucking flex on a bitch. I just want him to put this little brat in his place every now and then. I just want it for my petty soul, you know? My Madra is petty. So he comes down and is basically like, what have you done? You strengthened the Dreadgod. Mercy won't tell me how. My mom has said that you, like, none of us can come and see you. And when Lyndon says, I can't tell you, he starts to be like, how dare, and he's like, no, literally, I swore an oath to your mother. And Pride says, so you did do something, you idiot. Lyndon could literally kill Pride with a word. Strangely, he was less irritated now that he knew Pride would keep the same attitude no matter how advanced Lyndon was. Which I do kind of understand what he means. This isn't even Pride feeling like a superiority to Lyndon the way I was assuming that was the issue before. He's acting the exact same way. However, there's a part of me that's like, oh, well, that's because it's not about your advancement. It's personal. It's so personal that it doesn't matter. He's never going to like you. And that is kind of a bummer. But I don't know. I also get the feeling Pride does respect him. And he's just mad at the fact that he respects him. He doesn't like respecting him. And I can understand that. And he is essentially like, you could have had everything. You had my family's favor in every direction. And you're throwing it away. What are you doing? And Lyndon is like, you saw the thing with heaven. That was Ethan. And at first Pride doesn't believe him. And finally Pride starts to get pale and is like, wait, oh, did you know? And he assumes his mother wants to keep Mercy away from Lyndon because Lyndon's going to ascend and Malice doesn't want Mercy ascending. And Lyndon is like, well, I'm not ascending. There are Dreadgods. I'm not fucking leaving. And finally Pride is like, all right, well, you are in like a tough position, I guess. I'm sorry. And I love Dross being like, ooh, so much internal conflict. This is delicious. And I'm just like, Dross. Oh man. So Lyndon invites him inside. Pride is all like manners and etiquette. And at one point they're talking about Mercy advancing and Lyndon helping her. And Pride is like, why do you think my mother didn't help? And Lyndon says, apparently your family really values being able to figure it out for yourself over doing things quickly, which I do understand. It makes a lot of sense. And Pride says, those who sprint tend to trip. He gave Lyndon a meaningful look, but Lyndon bit into a kind of sugared cracker that Dross had found somewhere. He hadn't tripped so far. And this is what I'm talking about. He hadn't tripped so far. He could just say it. He could just say that. He could just say that. I don't know what kind of effect it would have, but I want him to. I just want him to say it. But he is better than me, and he won't. And just stop being better than me for just a second, Lyndon, and give me a little bit of satisfaction. I just need something, like a little sprinkle, like some salt, you know? Anyway, Pride tells him, stop sprinting. You'll reach Monarch eventually, as long as no one kills you. Even our books don't guarantee us Monarch. Don't rush. Wait until the Dreadgods die down again. Work with our family and don't provoke my mother. Live a long life and then ascend. And Lyndon says, why are you telling me this? And Pride kicks the table, spills the tea, not in the good way, and is essentially like, who the fuck else is going to say any of this to you? Somebody needs to. You're going to fuck yourself up, and I don't want to see that happen. And then he interrupts himself and says, Mercy doesn't want to see you hurt. And I was like, Pride, I think that was you, though. I think you kind of do give a shit a drop. Just a little. And I love that. He's mad at Lyndon because he's like a little bit worried. And he's also worried on behalf of his sister who really cares about Lyndon. And I believe that a lot of it has to do with Mercy. I really do. But I think there's a tiny bit that's actually just Pride, too. You know? I love this. I love this so much. I don't want to see my sister's friends obliterated because they were being stupid. It's a waste. And then he apologizes for spilling all of that tea, which he has not done since he was a child. And Lyndon says, I'm kind of in a corner and I'm going to do what I have to do. And Pride is like, all right, fine. You can do what you want. I just had to be the one to tell you because I know nobody's going to fucking say this. Which is honestly what everybody has been saying to Lyndon in every book is just, Lyndon, you need to chill and slow down. You are going to fuck yourself. You really are. And he hasn't yet. But I am kind of wondering if he isn't like going to. Like Maybe it's been so smooth. Maybe he is. And he's going to have to find a way out of it. And I don't want it, but I'm also like slightly interested in what that would look like. I can't lie. So Lyndon is like, oh, you're going to go see your sister. Tell her we'll be there soon. And Pride is like, dude, what the fuck? I just told you. What are you doing? And Lyndon's like, I'm not trying to piss your mom off, but Mercy is on my team. One way or another, I'm coming for her. Your team? Are you entering another tournament? You can be on my team too, Pride. You're invited. No, thanks. I have a family. And so does Mercy. And just as he's leaving, Lyndon's like, hey, would you let me see your book? And at first, Pride is just like, no. But Lyndon holds a hand out and is like, come on. I just want to know. Just. And finally, Pride says, make it quick. So Lyndon begins to scan the book, but he has so much weight to him that it's very uncomfortable for Pride. Dross examined the structure of the divine treasure as eagerly as Lyndon did. After only a minute or two, Pride released the manifestation. That's enough. It's uncomfortable enough having you stare at me for so long. I hate it. And Lyndon's like, I appreciate it, and I also have a couple of questions, and Pride crushes his gate stone and just immediately bails, which I did find very funny. That 2 minutes was more than I was expecting of him, to be fair. And then we have him returning to the ancestor's tomb. And y'all, I am like 10 minutes over here, and I haven't even gotten to this moment. But we have a lot of Lyndon thinking about how Osmanthus and Osriel and Aethan seem like very distinct, separate people, and wondering exactly how that came to be, which I suspect we will be finding out. We know a lot of it, but there's obviously some other shit mixed in there. And this is when Dross says something about, we hang under the cloud of doom, standing up in our futile struggle. And this is when Lyndon says it's not futile. Dross's arms drooped and he sighed. No, it's not, but it would be more exciting if it were. So he says there is no substitute for experience, so we'll steal theirs. And we have an echo of Northstrider that steps out, and Rhaegon Shen, and Ahura Malice. With the knowledge we have of Mercy's Book of Eternal Night, we can sneak a glimpse into Malice's dark powers. The book is an idealized version of her path, not the one she truly follows, and thus we will always be plagued by uncertainty, but we are close to understanding. With some more observation of her, and perhaps a peek into Mercy's book, we will treat Malice like we did Harmony. Which, yikes. Fucking, that was so satisfying. I can't wait to get to that book in my reread. And Dross also is saying to Lyndon that he really needs to find a way to replace his arm, which is not as easy as he is making it sound. But he is working on it. And the chapter ends. Lyndon looked from a buried elixir that would greatly increase the advancement of anyone on a force path, perfect for zeal, to a castle where a black dragon's herald remnant had been frozen in time for hundreds of years. He pulled up a chair and opened himself to the memories. Gratitude, Dross. What's first? So, this is the end of chapter 2. I went over time with just one chapter. I think it's very clear that I am not able to do my job. And I apologize to all of you. I got broken. The series has broken my abilities. But I'm enjoying being broken, I guess. What can you do? I'm making it work. And I'm just trying my best here. So I need to not get so sidetracked, but I can't help it. How am I not supposed, tell me one thing I said in this episode that wasn't essential. Nothing. Every single thing I said, totally crucial. So, I can't give myself any notes. I'm just going to have to deal with what I do. All right, guys. Love you very much. And I'll see you Tuesday. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.